Hey, I'm Scott Horton here for the Future of Freedom, the monthly journal of the Future Freedom Foundation at fff.org/subscribe. Since 1989, FFF has been pushing an uncompromising moral and economic case for peace, individual liberty, and free markets. Sign up now for the Future Freedom, featuring founder and president Jacob Hornberger, as well as Sheldon Richmond, James Bovard, Anthony Gregory, Wendy McElroy, and many more. It's just $25 a year for the print edition, $15 per year to read it online. That's fff.org/subscribe. And tell them Scott sent you.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. I'm Scott Horton. It's my show, The Scott Horton Show. All right, now our next guest is our good friend Gareth Porter. Welcome back to the show, Gareth. How are you doing?
Hi, Scott. Glad to be back. Thanks.
Very happy to have you here. First of all, it's been a few days, and I know this is a complicated story, and I won't ask you to give everybody the backstory of any kind of thing or anything, but you famously have debunked the Iran had Hezbollah blow up the Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires in 1994 story, and all the current narrative is that the prosecutor who bravely told the truth that it was Hezbollah has been murdered and made to look like a suicide, and then the reporter who broke the story had to flee the country in terror. And so my question is, have you had cause to rethink your previous journalism in any way, or is there anything that you would like to tell us about the story that you have learned or added context or any kind of thing?
Well, that, of course, we could spend a lot of time on for sure. Let me just start out by saying that there is nothing that has happened with regard to Nisman's death changes one iota the story that I think I have great confidence that the story that I have written about the lack of any evidence that Iran or Hezbollah were involved in the bombing of the Amia Community Center in 1994, or for that matter, the Israeli Embassy in 1992, that remains unaffected by any of this that has happened in the last couple of weeks with regard to Nisman. There are some things that I feel very confident about. There are a lot of things that I'm not confident about. That the things that I am very confident about include the fact that Nisman did not have any evidence whatsoever that Iran or Hezbollah were involved in that bombing attack. And so, I mean, the Nisman report is still what it was before, which is the 2006 request for the arrest of 7 senior Iranian officials for that 1994 bombing. That report remains a highly politicized, shabby piece of work that should have been exposed at the time as what it was. It took a long time to become clear about this, that it was indeed a really hack job. So the short answer is that my view of that has not changed a bit. I think what we're looking at in regard to the events in Buenos Aires more recently is the reality that in Argentina's government politics, you have no real confidence in the justice system or in the security apparatus of that country or in the government, and therefore anything is possible. Nothing can be ruled out at this point in terms of who is responsible. I certainly don't know. I don't know if we'll ever know. And there are obviously different theories that have been put forward about his death, including, of course, that the government itself at high levels was behind it, that rogue operators in the intelligence service were behind it. There's also a theory, which I think we have to take seriously and watch, that a former senior high-ranking intelligence official named Jaime Stuyuso, who was fired a couple of years ago, year and a half ago, roughly, who had obviously plenty of motive to blacken the present government's name, certainly has the capability to arrange something like this. So I just want to emphasize that we don't know what happened. It's going to be difficult to put it together, if not impossible, and that this has a lot to do with the essential nature of this Argentine system, from basically going back many years to the dictatorship.
Okay, right on. And I'm sorry to waste so much of the time of a Syria interview on this subject, but
it's okay. It's very important, I think. I'm glad you.
Sure. And I wasn't sure whether you'd have a different answer than the last time we spoke, which admittedly was just a few days ago, but it's a developing story, so, but anyway, so check this out. You wrote an article for Middle East Eye. We ran it at antiwar.com as well. Can Obama untangle from Syria's civil war? And to go along with this, a couple of footnotes here. Major New York Times piece by Ann Bernard, U.S. signals shift on how to end Syrian civil war. That came after your piece, I believe.
Right.
And then the news is that Kerry says he supports Syrian peace talks in Russia. Those are talks toward the having of talks, maybe, which is apparently, I guess that means they're scrapping Geneva II and its parameters, and they're going to start again. And then one more headline before I set you loose here would be Obama cuts off Syrian rebels' cash, which is Jamie Detmer at the Daily Beast today. That, finally Obama has decided to go ahead and switch back to Assad, George Bush's old policy of paying Assad to fight the Mujahideen for us. What do you think?
Right. Yeah, I think you're correct in suggesting that there are indications here that the Obama policy towards Syria, which was always highly ambivalent, to say the least, about supporting, providing arms to, quote, moderate rebels and so forth, is now essentially, it's finished. I think there's another story that you didn't mention in the Wall Street Journal that recounts the pretty much complete failure of the limited arming of the so-called moderates, and points out, among other things, that some of those individual commanders who were lining up for arms really wanted to use them to fight al-Nusra, not the Assad government, to make al-Nusra the priority. And according to the Wall Street Journal article today, the CIA folks who were in charge of this said no, they wouldn't support that. They wouldn't support people to fight al-Nusra, which is a rather interesting, although not terribly surprising sidelight about that program. But it is apparently now recognized as a failure by just about everybody. Everybody agrees on that, and that's one of the several indicators that the Obama administration is going through a very serious reappraisal of its Syria policy and trying to come up with something that is a bit more realistic. And among the things that is included in that reappraisal and an effort to try to reorient the policy is this idea of supporting local ceasefires, which I wrote about.
All right, well, we'll have to pick that up on the other side of this break. And I'm going to hunt down that Wall Street Journal article that I guess I missed.
Adamentus is
and here's one more I forgot to mention, Assad's interview in Foreign Affairs.
Right.
Which is worth taking a look at as well. We'll be right back, everybody, with Gareth Porter in just a sec.
Hey, Al Scott here. If you're like me, you need coffee. Lots of it. And you probably prefer it taste good, too. Well, let me tell you about Darren's Coffee Company at darrenscoffee.com. Darren Marion is a natural entrepreneur who decided to leave his corporate job and strike out on his own, making great coffee. And Darren's Coffee is now delivering right to your door. Darren gets his beans direct from farmers around the world. All specialty, premium grade with no filler. Hey, the man just wants everyone to have a chance to taste this great coffee. darrenscoffee.com. Use promo code Scott and you get free shipping. darrenscoffee.com. All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. I found it. It's linked in the Daily Beast article.
about Obama cutting off the funding there. I'm on the line with the great Gareth Porter, independent historian and journalist from Interpress Service. He writes also for Truth Out, some award-winning work there on the Afghan war, etc. And he's the author of Manufactured Crisis, the true story, the untold story behind the Iranian nuclear scare, which is the book on the subject. And right now, so we're talking about the mess of American Syria policy, and I think we've joked about this before because that's the only way really to discuss it, Gareth, is that it's been absolutely insane and almost, well, depending on your point of view, maybe call it lowercase t, treasonous for the Americans to have been backing the Mujahideen against Assad for the past 3 years. It was always the Nusra Front with the leadership before ISIS split off from them, and whatever so-called moderate groups were always very marginal in this thing. They always have been. And yet that's what Israel wants and what Saudi wants and what Turkey wants and whatever. So now the ship of the American empire is so huge that it takes, 9 months or something, 8-9 months to turn the thing around, to go back to war against the Mujahideen because the Islamic State thing got so far out of control in eastern Syria that now, come on, you got to go back in the Ba'athist. Obviously, non-intervention isn't an option here for these people. So they switch back to the equally evil and also counterproductive, but not outright treasonous policy that they had been the track before. And they're switching back to Assad, but it's taken them a while. It seems like. And that's what all this stuff is about, trying to figure out which rebels to back or how much to pretend they're training up this army of 5,000 men who are going to take on all comers or, whatever kind of thing they're pushing. But then, as you say, at the same time, behind the scenes, they're pushing for some kind of, or actually for small ceasefires and hopefully toward larger ones, right?
Well, this is, let me just make one basic point about the arming of the so-called moderates that Obama finally agreed to. I mean, it's very clear, and this has been, I think it's actually in the Wall Street Journal piece, or maybe it's the Daily Beast piece, I can't remember which one, that he agreed to go along with that reluctantly, only under pressure from the regional allies. I mean, I think this policy that we are now seeing sort of peter out and an effort to come up with something different, is really an artifact of this, a reflection of the degree to which the United States national security state is really tied up with these regional states, particularly Saudi Arabia and Israel, of course, the two big ones. But, to some extent, there's the relationship with Turkey is involved in this as well. And, maybe UAE as a security partner, in terms of bases, in terms of sales, military sales to UAE and so forth. All these things add up to an enormous degree of influence over U.S. policy in Syria. And I think that is, the hang up here. That's what is the problem that the Obama administration now has, trying to move to something that is rational, which is, to somehow have an understanding that we are going to, in some indirect fashion or direct fashion, work with the Assad regime to stabilize things and not try to really work directly against our interests of continuing destabilization in that part of the Middle East.
In Syria, it's Assad. There, it's Abadi and the government in Baghdad that George Bush put in power there. So at least it would be consistent.
Right, but of course the difference there, as you know well, is that in Iraq you have a regime that the Saudis don't like, but they have not been committed to overthrowing at this point, in the same way that they have in Syria. So it's it's slightly less pressure somewhat less pressure on the United States to follow a policy that is directly against U.S. interests.
Mm-hmm. All right, and now I'm sorry. Please tell us about the ceasefires and all that.
Yeah, I mean the point here is that the article that I wrote, I guess now 2.5 weeks ago, was taking off from the very interesting information that came out in November, and then early December, that the Obama administration had been talking with and reading the author of a very interesting paper that was calling for U.S. support of local ceasefires between the Assad regime and the rebel forces, some rebel forces, in places like Homs and particularly in the Damascus region, in the area around the capital. Now we know that dozens of these local ceasefires have in fact been negotiated, obviously with varying degrees of success in actually stopping the fighting, but that they have been effective in some cases, and Homs is one example that is extremely significant in terms of pointing towards a way in which there can be at least some minimum of slowing down the violence in Syria and allowing the civilian population in these places, which have been suffering tremendously from the war, to at least begin to recover some degree of normalcy. And so there were signs that the Obama administration was interested in this. After the NSC director for the Middle East, Robert Malley, had met with Nir Rosen, who was a very talented, very serious veteran Middle East correspondent, a Middle East journalist who's covered all of the wars in the Middle East. He met with him sometime in November, and after that, we know that the White House held a series of meetings, one of which was presided over by Obama himself, which were discussing basically what to do about U.S. policy. And so there's reason to believe that there was a serious consideration being given to this. Nothing has been leaked since then, to my knowledge, since November, early December, about the Obama reconsideration of policy, including this point. But it seems pretty clear that is something that is now at least under discussion, if not actually, being undertaken by the Obama administration to give some kind of indirect support. The United Nations, by the way, is very, very much involved in that process, and one of the ways to do it is for the United States to work with the UN Special Envoy on that.
You hate government? One of them libertarian types? Or maybe you just can't stand the president, gun grabbers, or warmongers. Me too. That's why I invented LibertyStickers.com. Well, Rick owns it now, and I didn't make up all of them, but still, if you're driving around and want to tell everyone else how wrong their politics are, there's only one place to go. LibertyStickers.com has got your bumper covered. Left, right, libertarian, empire, police, state, founders quotes, central banking. Yes, bumper stickers about central banking. Lots of them. And, well, everything that matters. LibertyStickers.com. Everyone else's stickers suck.
All right, you guys, welcome back. Hey, I got Gareth to stay on one more segment with us. Hooray. Talking about the situation in Syria and Iraq and the Islamic State and this and that. So like I was saying, Gareth, earlier, I find it kind of ironic that America's so bogged down in this policy of doing what Israel wants and fighting Assad because Assad backs Hezbollah and is friends with Iran and all their priorities. Even where it ended up favoring, and I know that Obama was much more reluctant than Hillary and Petraeus and Panetta, as Hillary herself accuses Obama,
yes,
to make matters even worse. But he still has been, always insisting that Assad must go, must be a part of any talks with anybody and all this for all these years and help make it this way. But so now and I've actually taken it as kind of an ironic relief that they're so bogged down in this treasonous policy that it's difficult for them to just outright back Assad, just like they back body and the Iranians, and for that matter, join up with the Russians and kill these Islamic State guys, which is what I think they would like to do, since it's basically Osama bin Laden incarnate standing up there on a balcony like Mussolini, declaring himself the dictator of, former Iraqi Sunnistan there, which is a gigantic PR disaster for the empire, probably incomparable to anything else. And so, but now I'm worried that they got the ship of state turnaround, and now they're going to start backing the Ba'athist army, and now they're going to have much more of a real war. They don't want to send in the 3rd Infantry Division, but maybe they'll, switch back to the Bush policy of really backing Assad against the Mujahideen, since the moderates always have been a fantasy, as the president says. And now I'm worried they'll get their act together and make matters that much worse, because even though it wouldn't be outright treasonous, it would be horribly counterproductive. I mean, that was what Michael Scheuer said, was for America to now come in outright as the air force of the Iranian Quds Force and Hezbollah and Shiite, Alawite, Ba'athist Assad against them is good for their movement. It just proves how right they are about all of their enemies in their own public relations. It's just as bad, even though in an indirect way. But so, do you think my fears are right, that this could help pave the way to an even worse war?
I think you're right to be very anxious about that point. Absolutely. There's always going to be an important element within the Pentagon that are ready to escalate military involvement in a country, particularly when it's air power. And I think that's the situation that we see in Syria. So absolutely, if there were an understanding, an informal understanding, the United States was now going to tolerate the Assad regime and reach, at the very least, an implicit deal that Assad would allow U.S. bombing, would agree to U.S. bombing, and that there would be coordination, tactical coordination, intelligence sharing, and so forth. There's no doubt that would be very, very welcomed by very important parts of the Pentagon, particularly, of course, the Air Force, and that would almost inevitably result in the kind of escalation that I think we all have to be afraid of, because of, we know what the consequences of that are going to be. I mean, I'm not saying that, it's great what we're doing right now. I'm saying that it could get a lot worse, and that's something definitely to be concerned about.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was just speaking right before you with Mitch Prothero again, and we were talking about, again, the relative strength between the Islamic State in Iraq, as it exists in Iraq especially, as part of that discussion, now versus AQI back when, say, 2005 or 6 or whatever. And he's just saying, it's magnitudes more powerful. Sure. And the ability to create any kind of awakening movement. And in Iraq, we've seen them do it, build up the so-called moderates, the tribal Sunnis against the bin Ladenites. And we've seen that work, but it took a lot of American intervention on their side to do it, as Prothero was explaining. And so where Obama seems to rightly call it a fantasy in Syria, it seems to be still their policy, I guess, in Iraq and Syria, right? Because I admit to you, even though it's the thing I'm worst afraid of, it doesn't seem like they want to send in the 3rd Infantry Division again like W. Bush did. That's the one lesson Obama has learned of what not to do. But what the hell they think they are going to do? Because, as Prothero says, the Shiites aren't going to fight for Mosul, Fallujah, and Tikrit. They're just not going to go and die for Mosul. And neither are the Kurdish Peshmerga either, and nor can they, really.
Well, it's a formula for endless war, isn't it? I mean, that's what is absolutely going to be the result of whatever the United States does or doesn't do, as long as, it has a hand in the fight. We're going to have a war that cannot have any termination. I mean, there's nothing, no possibility in sight for defeating the Islamic State by military force. And so it is, as I say, a formula for endless war. And that in itself is something that appeals to the national security state of the United States. That's what they're all about. So that is not a negative from their point of view. And at the same time that they are, taking advantage of this in all kinds of ways that, you are familiar with, and I know your listeners are familiar with by now, they're also, taking advantage of all their ties with the Saudis, the Israelis, UAE, Qatar, and so forth. All of these extremely important relationships that the NSA, the CIA, the Pentagon, the military services have with the regional countries that have been pushing the United States, in the direction of the most irrational kind of policy from a historical strategic point of view. Mm-hmm. Those are still very much a vital part of the calculus that goes into U.S. policy in both Syria and Iraq.
Right. You mean like Israel bombing Hezbollah and an Iranian general in Syria in an airstrike last week, for example. They haven't changed their policy just because Obama, just like Michael Oren said before he finished being ambassador, that, hey, we prefer these bad guys to those bad guys. In other words, we don't care who's the butcher of New York and who's not. We hate Iran more. And so therefore you do too.
No doubt about it. Yeah. And what I'm trying to do here is to keep drawing people's attention to the sort of invisible links that exist between all of these major national security bureaucracies and the regional countries that are very much influencing the U.S. policy. They're both ties that have to do with programs, with formal programs that benefit the bureaucrats, and they're ties that are very very profitable for the people who are either retired from these agencies, like the NSA and the CIA, or who intend to be retired in the future. Mm-hmm. So,
and the corporations too. I've heard it said, I forget who to give credit to, but that Israel is just a money laundering operation for Lockheed is all they are. It's just American tax money bounces off Israel and goes back into their bank account all day long.
It's the Lockheeds of the world, but it's also the Booz Allens. And that looms much more important now than it did a decade ago, obviously.
Yeah, like in The Shadow Factory by James Bamford.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for everyone. And that's in the Snowden documents too. A bit of it is about the Israeli and American, you're referring to the NSA, the surveillance technology state there, right?
Surveillance programs, obviously all kinds of programs that have to do with the NSA are involved, but also the contracts that are part of the whole approach to the Middle East that benefit all these players outside the NSA and the other bureaucracies.
All right, thanks very much, Gareth. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks very much, Scott. Good to talk to you.
Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for WallStreetWindow.com. Mike Swanson knows his stuff. He made a killing running his own hedge fund and always gets out of the stock market before the government-generated bubbles pop, which is, by the way, what he's doing right now, selling all his stocks and betting on gold and commodities. Sign up at WallStreetWindow.com and get real-time updates from Mike on all his market moves. It's hard to know how to protect your savings and earn a good return in an economy like this. Mike Swanson can help. Follow along on paper and see for yourself. WallStreetWindow.com. Oh, John Kerry's Mideast peace talks have gone nowhere. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for the Council for the National Interest at councilforthenationalinterest.org. U.S. military and financial support for Israel's permanent occupations of the West Bank and Gaza Strip is immoral, and it threatens national security by helping generate terrorist attacks against our country. And face it, it's bad for Israel, too. Without our unlimited support, they would have much more incentive to reach a lasting peace with their neighbors. It's past time for us to make our government stop making matters worse. Help support CNI at councilforthenationalinterest.org.